There's so much here. It reminded me of another poem by Rilke that I'd like to share. I've shared this at most of our high holidays. And you'll notice a through line, this idea of something great pressing in on us and somehow forging from that pressure a new being. So I'll just read straight from the English. This is from Rilke's Book of Hours. It feels as though I make my way through massive rock, like a vein of ore, alone, encased. I am so deep inside it, I can't see the path or any distance. Everything is close, and everything closing in on me has turned to stone. Since I don't know enough about pain, this terrible darkness makes me small. If it's you, though, press down hard on me, break in, that I may know the weight of your hand, and you the fullness of my cry. I've always read this on Rosh Hashanah, the sense that when one becomes aware, and we're going to put the idea of the judging God in the liturgy aside, just as the poem that you're sharing with Shanti seems to say that we are suddenly confronted by an immensity. And we see that our small fights are not worthwhile, and there's something so great in which we are encased. And when we become aware of that, it's as if that pressure births a new being. So I'd like to share with all of you. Hold on a second, Meryl. Can we shift? Can we change a little the view that I'm seeing ever so slightly? Thank you. I'd like to see all you nice folks. And that is the following. When I was reading this poem, first of all, a few double meanings. One, of course, is, as I shared in my Shabbat thought, our Torah portion actually never mentions Jacob fighting with an angel. That comes from the book of Hosea, chapter 12. In our Torah portion, it says that an ish, a somebody, an unidentified man. Ish is an unidentified man. Isha is an unidentified woman. Encountered Joseph in the night, and you can see the details in my Shabbat thought. But a very brief line in the book of Hosea has clearly captured the imagination of nearly every reader of this story, certainly in great artists and painters and sculptor. And every single person, I think, that has told the story, they mentioned Jacob and the angel. Of course, there's no angel in chapter 32. So I'm open, therefore, to what the angel is. So here's a thought of mine. I want to think of not Jacob fighting an angel, but his brother Esau fighting the angel. So we're going to change the perspective a bit. Because it says in Hosea that Jacob struggled with an angel, that's dominated our consciousness. Let's read Genesis chapter 32 raw, and I'll expand more on this tomorrow, because it takes us right into the theme I introduced last week, which is how do we use our ancient textual tradition for nourishment of the soul. And one thing we do, as I shared last week, is we put a tzohar. Some say it means a gem, some say it means a light, onto the word, or onto the phrase, onto the text, and we enter into the depth of the text, and the depth then shines back into us, and there's this mutual dialogue between the depths of our soul and the depth of the text. What if it is Esau struggling with the so-called angel? I want us to think for a minute about Esau. As you know from the story that I'll review tomorrow, and I read in my Shabbat comment, Esau was so profoundly wounded by what Jacob did. He was filled with rage, and almost a duplication of the story of Cain and Abel. God favored Abel, and therefore Cain killed Abel out of envy, out of desolation, out of despair, that God perverted his brother, and Cain did not know why. Now we think of Esau in that exact same position. And in many ways, this story is on the road to the resolution of that first story outside the Garden of Eden, which is the story of Cain and Abel. That's our introduction to the human condition, by the way. Once we exit the Garden of Eden, is Cain and Abel. Murderous rage that sometimes turns into deep depression, paralysis, that we can't control our lives, that this thing that we call life dominates us, and we can push back ever so slightly. I remember one thing I read in a Yiddish story many years ago of a man in a coffee house playing chess with the angel of death. And someone said, you know you're going to lose. And he said, I'm not going to win, but I'm going to give him a good fight. And this idea that we're never going to defeat the angel of death. We're never going to, as it were, defeat life. The question is how we fight in this struggle, in this wrestling match that we're going to lose. So Esau, in my mind, has been fighting his rage. He's been cheated by his brother, who tricked his father. He suddenly realizes at some point that his mother was behind the whole thing. And my sense is Esau is devastated that his life is not what he thought it was. Now, the question for Esau, and I think the question for all of us at some level, is once you identify where you are stuck, where you're fixated, the question is, are you going to fight it? Now, where we get stuck and where we get fixated, and sometimes it's only in our deep interior moments where we realize no matter how much we go through life, we keep arriving back at the same internal place. So we need a deep existential commitment that we're not staying here, the will to move and the skill to move. And I just imagine Esau, perhaps at one point in his life realizing this rage is doing me no good. And I have this image of his mother guiding him. He says, but how can I possibly forgive Jacob? And his mother saying, you'll have to figure that out yourself. I just know the rage is killing you. And then at a certain point, Esau realizing, okay, I'll forgive him. You know, I was not meant for the birthright. He was meant for the birthright. I'm just going to let this thing go. And I think of Rebecca saying, well, you've gone half the distance. There's more to go. He said, I don't understand what more I can do. And then at a certain point, Esau realizes that there's something much greater than the rage, much greater than the birthright, much greater than his hurt, much greater than his life spinning out of control. There's something much greater. And when he realizes there's something much greater in this text, he understands that the fight is not against Jacob. The fight is not for the birthright. The fight is with this greater thing. And Esau has to, as it were, shift his shape because of the storm around him that has nothing to do with his brother, nothing to do with the birthright. It's Esau's struggle. The more I read this parsha, the more I focus on the struggle of Esau. So what does Esau do, as we see in the parsha? Esau loses the fight. And as I looked here when it says, whoever was beaten by the angel, let's try to imagine for a moment. Jacob is the angelic presence that forces Esau to make a decision. A, forgive this and move on. That's hard. And secondly, empathetically understanding the pain that Jacob went through. So many times we just think of how we feel, what it means to us, and suddenly you realize somebody else is going through something deep. And we think of the world and we refer to the world as extensions of the self, and then you have this moment of insight. We're not the center of other people's worlds. That from their position, we're in their world. And then this incredible liberating sense, it's about them and it's not about me. It's their day, it's not my day. I'm not here to get my needs met. I'm here to meet the needs of another person. It's not about me. It's about something great. And maybe when I realize what it means to them, whatever I need, what they need is greater. Whatever I need, what they need is greater. In some objective sense, Not every need has the same intensity, and I'm going to say the same spiritual moral value. And when we can escape that prison of self, he looks at his brother and suddenly realizes, it hasn't been easy on my brother. My brother was forced into this. My brother had to leave town for 20 years. My brother did not have the benefit of our mother Rebecca. He had to go with her brother Laban, who is a crook and a cheat himself. And at that moment, I think of Esau saying, I think this is not about me. I think it's about my brother. And just as in the fight, it says that a great harsh hand that kneaded him as if to change his shape. This is the Esau changing the shape of the victim, of the wronged man to the man who can provide a blessing. Try to imagine the shift of that form. He's no longer the person who was wronged. He's the person who can, in a singular way, provide a blessing for another person. That's a dramatic shift. That needed him as if to change his shape. Winning does not tempt that man. Esau no longer needed to win. Esau needed Jacob to win. And that is how he grows, by being defeated decisively by constantly greater beings. Not that Jacob was a greater being, but that the meaning of Esau's life was the greater being. And the meaning of his life was not about revenge. The meaning of his life was not about settling scores. It's something greater, something immense. So one reason I love this poem so much, Shanti, is that I've been wanting to teach when people say, how do I nurture my soul? How do I grow as a human being? And I believe that when we encounter the textual tradition, especially through the archetypal study of Torah, which means we take these stories and we elevate them into the archetypal experiences of the human condition. So it's not what's happened then, happens all the time. But that takes reflection. That takes imagination. That takes skill. It takes us back away from the text and saying, what is this text really saying at the deepest level? You have to open your soul up to the text. And I read this text by Rilke, where he ends with this. And again, my interpretation might be different from his. He took it a different way. But what I'm recognizing in the poem, Rilke read the text. When I looked at the storm, I thought of the storm in the book of Job. I see so many biblical references all throughout this book. We know that Rilke knew his Bible. And I can see it permeating the poem. And I just say, here's a person who read the text. Here's a person whose soul encountered the text and allowed the text to reach into him. And he wrote this beautiful drash. And I think that's the challenge to all of us. We have a beautiful tradition, and we all know, if I may speak metaphorically, this tradition has been, as it were, brutalized by quote unquote Hebrew school. Meaning, for children, you might say the most base understanding of Bible is given. It's laws and stories. It's ethics. Well, there's a lot of things that aren't so ethical. Some of the laws are actually brutal themselves. And the narratives don't seem to be historical. So the kid gets out of Hebrew school and say, well, I don't believe in the law. There's ethical failures, and these stories aren't historical, so I'm out of the game. And it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. Because this beautiful, beautiful tradition that's been passed down one generation to the next, now put in the hands of people who don't know how to read it, don't understand its beauty. And here it is, this immense treasure trove of guidance for the soul is left undiscovered. It's Ali Baba's cave that was never, ever opened. How do we repair this? How do we bestow the treasure of the tradition to another generation? We have to do it ourselves. We have to study it. We have to let it transform us. And when another person has an ear that can hear, and a mind that can understand, and a heart that can receive, we have to say, this is beautiful and this is deep. I want to show you how to read it. It's our text. but it's been preserved because it's a beautiful text. So Shanti, thank you so much. I was trying to figure out how to say this during the day, and then I looked at your poem and I said, that's how I'm going to say it. So thank you. Thank you, Rilke. Thank you for the authors and preservers of our tradition, and thank all of you for being here tonight.